Hello everybody and welcome back to the channel for the next part of my one-turn playthrough of VUCA Simulation... Sorry, let me try that again. VUCA Simulations Task Force, and specifically the Battle of the Coral Sea scenario. Now, just a very quick recap. We saw a bit of maneuvering by both sides as they were trying to gain an advantage, edge towards their objectives in the case of the Japanese, followed by airstrikes committed against task forces that had been sighted. Of course, the Japanese could only really see, and I'm going to zoom in for this one, just so we can see the print on the task forces a bit more clearly. So the Japanese could only really see the US cruiser force, Task Force 7 over there. They were aware that US carriers were in the area. They had actually, I say they couldn't really see anything. They had actually identified the Lexington's task group, but their only aircraft carrier left at the start of the day was, in this area within striking range, was Shokaku's group. Now, critically, they could not see they could not see the Yorktown group, which was over there and within airstrike range of them, and they were out of range of Task Force 2. So, taking a bit of a gamble on it, they decided to send an airstrike against the cruiser group. As we saw in the previous video, the results of that were unfortunately a little unsatisfactory. One cruiser reduced to virtual sinking condition, but that was about it. In the meantime, Yorktown's group managed to attack Shokaku, and unfortunately for the Japanese, sank her outright. So that's a major catastrophe. And that's not the end of the pain for the Japanese, because when we ended the previous video, I was about to resolve the second US strike, this time from Lexington's group, which had been launched against this force, which is, now that the aircraft are over it, the US can see who it is. I know, Oscar, panic, 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 panic. It is Japanese Task Force 7. So there's a rather large air group heading for TF7. Let's go and find out who they are. Yes, I know, I'm quite worried about them too, Oscar. Oh dear, right. This is probably going to be very short and very sharp. So the Japanese Task Force 7 consists of a mere 3 destroyers, and that is it. Now, this is bad for the Japanese. I have a terrible suspicion they're about to lose certainly at least 1 destroyer, possibly more. But there is perhaps a silver lining in this, in that this is quite a powerful US strike. And luckily for the Japanese, it has gone right past their larger task force. The one immediately adjacent to TF7 is, of course, the 4 Japanese heavy cruisers that were accompanying Shoho to begin with. But instead, this rather hefty US punch has traipsed right past them and picked on these small ships instead. So, bit of a wasted effort, but there we go. I mean, it just adds to the US victory point pile. So we'll do the usual. There's no accompanying fighters overhead, so it's going to be a straight case of the US sending their forces in. And they are going to split their attacks. They're going to combine the efforts. I mean, obviously their fighters can't do anything. There's no aerial opposition. So they are going to group. I'll just move these along so I've got some maneuvering room. Half of the dive bombers and the torpedo planes are going to go against that pair of destroyers there. This group of dive bombers will hang back and see what the results are. Now, unfortunately for the Japanese, that lone destroyer doesn't generate any anti-aircraft strength, and the pair that's under attack only generate 1. But they're going to gamely make their roll. So they rolled a 2, which on the anti-aircraft table shoots down no US aircraft, but it does give them a +1 modifier to their bombing roll. So their aim is at least thrown off a little bit. So the US with a combined anti-shipping strength of 6 is going to make their roll and add 1. So they get a 3, which goes up to a 4. I know, Oscar, I feel their pain too. So down come the bombs, and the US have scored 8 damage points. I know. Tragic, buddy. So 8 damage points. One for their basic durability or toughness. Another one would have given them a minor damage counter. Third damage point flips it, so they're down to 1 destroyer now. But they've still got 5 more damage points to resolve, which, when you pile all of that onto them, effectively sinks the other one too. So 2 destroyers have already gone under as the first wave of US planes move away. And that leaves this poor lonesome one on its own as the remainder of the dive bombers come in. Now, of course, with an anti-aircraft rating of 0, that's going to be nothing but sound and fury, signifying nothing. So no doubt the destroyer bangs away at the incoming aircraft, but they're not deterred in the slightest, and they come in with an attack strength of 4, no modifier, and they roll a 4. So consulting the column, that does 4 damage. So again, same doleful thing, 1 for the durability, 2 for the damage, third one for heavy. Oh yes, she's already flipped, so that destroyer goes too. The cumulative damage is just too much. So that poor task force, that trio of destroyers, has been completely wiped out. And for the first time in the game, a task force counter is actually removed from the board because there's simply no ships left in it. The only consolation for the Japanese there, other than the fact that this strike hit a very weak target rather than something more valuable, is that at least they can trade in that lost task force counter for another dummy. So during the upcoming night turns, they can refresh all the dummies in the hope of confusing the US Navy tomorrow. So the raid is done, and Lexington's fighters go into the landing from Mapbox. So that concludes what we'd started yesterday with the, or at least just giving that away, at the time of the last video recording, as far as the air combat phase goes and the air operations phases go. So all of those are now completed. Various aircraft are on their way home. Now, just one final note about the Shokaku group. If your aircraft, the Japanese won't experience this until the next turn, so it's outside the scope of this demo. But when her returning aircraft come into land next turn, they will of course find there's no carrier there for them to land on. The rule then is that if you have another airbase or a carrier within 5 hexes of your lost ship, then you can still make it back. Unfortunately for those Japanese aircraft, there is nothing within a 5 hex radius that they can land on. So bad enough that Shokaku has gone, but one way or another, her entire air group is going to end up in the drink. So really not good. The US, in the meanwhile, is absolutely thrilled. Dixon to carrier scratched 2 flat tops in the same afternoon. What a triumph. So that is the air phase done. The next phase in a turn is the recon phase. Now this is quite an unusual mechanic, but I quite like the way it works. In a lot of the aircraft carrier games I'm used to, the recon phase happens quite early in the turn, but here it doesn't. And there's very good reasons for that. I like the time lag and the reporting lag that it builds into this game. So effectively what happens with recon is that every land base, if you have any in play, or every aircraft carrier generates a certain amount of search points. And they vary, which is quite nice. It gives you a bit of flavor, and they're summarized in this table here. So in the early war period, before the Japanese have learned the sharp lessons of Midway, Their carriers and land bases can each only search one hex of their choice. And the range of search aircraft is 8 hexes from either their land base or their carrier. For the Allies, it's 2 throughout the war, which is quite handy. So their land bases initially are not so good. They get a bit better later, but their carriers are very good at reconnaissance. So as the Japanese have the initiative, they would go first. The trouble is, with the loss of Shokaku, they now only have one aircraft carrier in play, and that's Zuikaku well over here. And 8 hexes out from Zuikaku is there. So the Japanese now have another problem in that their reconnaissance is effectively blinded. They still have information on the US task forces that have been sighted, and there's still 2 turns of daylight left. Maybe, if their surface forces, particularly the 4 heavy cruisers in this group, can get themselves in and among a US task force, they have a slight chance of evening the score. But to be perfectly honest, foreshadowing the tactics of Midway, having achieved this significant tactical victory, there's actually no reason for the US to hang around waiting for the Japanese to blunder into them. They can just move back, keep the Japanese surface ships at arm's length, and continue pummeling them with aircraft. And as we've seen, US air power is incredibly potent, even in May 1942. So maybe a better thing for the Japanese to do might be to fall back towards the Zuikaku and hope for the best. We will see. So the Japanese cannot search. The US can search, but they have already found all the Japanese task forces in their vicinity. These others here are too far away. They'll have to wait for a future turn. But what I'm going to do is do a bit of pretending, because otherwise, in this situation, nobody's going to do any searching. So let's say that both these task forces were invisible to the, or you had a marker there, the flag side up, so you had no idea what they were. And if we assume that, well, it is a US carrier, they can use their 2 searches to draw a random search marker from the cup. They do this twice. You draw a random marker and you place it on the target task force. Once both sides have committed all these counters, and they are drawn from a shared cup, so you get a series of randomized results. The Japanese player, not the US player, this is very important, will secretly look at it and announce what it is. Now, in this case, unluckily for the Japanese, that's a detected marker. There's no 2 ways about it. The US knows exactly what type of task force is there, whether it's a surface task force or a carrier task force. Now, they won't know what ships are in it. They won't have specific names. But a flat top is a flat top, and so that has been spotted. The next one, misdirect. Misdirect, excuse me, sorry. Misdirect allows the Japanese, or the US player, if they're on the receiving end of this, to have a little bit of fun with their opponent. Because when you draw a misdirect report, you confirm that there is a task force there, but you tell your opponent that it's the opposite. So that in reality was a surface task force. So the Japanese would tell his US opponent that it is in fact a carrier task force, and it would be marked with a carrier marker. Now, it does help to have a good poker face for this, but as you can see, the potential for causing bewilderment is quite major. So if you take those reports on good faith as the US player, be very tempting to think you have actually got 2 Japanese flat tops in very close proximity to each other. The misdirect counter is lots and lots of fun that way. The third type of counter you can get is one of these, and it's either a contact lost, meaning your scout wasn't able to keep hold of the task force or properly report on it. So effectively, it's no contact. And if the task force that you're searching is a dummy rather than a real task force, the only way you can clear that up with aerial searching is to get a detected result. And then your opponent will say, okay, it's not a real task force, it's just a dummy. If you draw a misdirect when searching out or checking out a dummy task force, your opponent just does his best neutral look and says, oh, it's no contact, you couldn't determine what it was. And the same if you get a contact loss. Now, we tried to check it out, there's something there, but we don't know what. So it's quite a simple system as these things go, but it generates a lot of uncertainty, which I really like because it really captures the feel of this kind of warfare. So that would have been the recon phase, but in the for the purposes of this exercise, because the U.S. Navy has been so successful this turn, there's no reconnaissance on either side because it's either unnecessary or they're incapable of doing it. So finally, we get to the end of the turn. If there are any fleet units together in the same hex, you can stack an endless number of counters, a mix of both dummies and real task forces on each other. You can reorganize your fleets at this point. You are limited to what you can do during the day. So, for example, you cannot split task forces during daylight turns, and you can't introduce new dummies during daylight turns, but you can merge task forces during daylight, and you can also rearrange their internal composition. So your reasons for doing that might be that you just want to change things so that the anti-aircraft defense is better. And a very good example, if I come back up here, is what's left of Shokaku's task force. So obviously now that the carrier has been sunk, there's actually no good reason for these two to remain in a ring formation. They can't support each other with their anti-aircraft weapons. A far better thing to do would be to change their task force number and composition so that they are in a line ahead formation. And now, having done that, they can at least provide each other with mutual support. I think another thing might well be Task Force 7 and 10 possibly want to try and merge into a single powerful force. There may be good tactical reasons for doing that if you're wanting to force a surface action, or at least try to. So that is it. That is one complete turn of Task Force. I hope I've done a good enough job of explaining it. I realize I went on tangents a couple of times, but it has been interesting to see how this one played out. It just goes to show how uncertain this form of warfare can be, because 2 turns ago, both sides were pretty much equal. And even after the loss of Shoho, there need not have been as big a Japanese disaster as we just saw. As to whether Japan can win the game, from this point, I would say it's extremely difficult, but not impossible. And it would depend on the US player either getting massively overconfident, I mean, they have good reason to be, or making some kind of really serious error. But I don't think any US player would be that generous in this scenario. So Japan's remaining options, really, if they want to have a stab at winning this in the current situation, would be to make sure that Operation MO, the landing of the troops, proceeds according to the intended schedule. And there are 3 ways of fulfilling this. I touched on, 3 conditions you have to fulfill for this to happen. I touched on these at the beginning of the previous video. The invasion force needs to be within a certain distance of Port Moresby to ensure that they can land there on the 10th of May. That was the original invasion date. They have to enjoy at least some cover from Zero fighters. That is still possible if Zuikaku can stay intact and can keep her planes overhead. It's going to be extremely chancy, but it's doable. The last one is that no functional US carrier has to be within striking distance of the Japanese approach area. Now, this is the challenging one, because what the US could do now, if they really wanted to throw a spanner in the works, was they could either dispose of these two task forces as best they can and then move that way, or even that way if they're feeling confident enough. And in doing so, they would force a battle on the Zuikaku, which she would be quite badly equipped to win. Being outnumbered 2-1 is not great. And as Hiryu was going to discover later at the Battle of Midway, you really don't want to be fighting multiple opponents, because even if you get the edge of them in scouting and you get the drop on them first, your air attacks against heavily defended targets, especially if they have a combat air patrol up, are necessarily going to be costly. So Zuikaku's really going to feel every reduction in her air strength. Whereas the US carriers, I mean, okay, they have already suffered losses. Again, if I come back here, you can see from the number of aircraft counters that have been flipped over. But for sheer mass, they probably outnumber the Japanese in the order of 3-1. And I just don't see that ending well. Just to complicate Zuikaku's life, she's not only got to look after herself, she's also got to make sure she can guard the transport fleets, which I think is too big an ask for a single carrier. So if I were the Japanese, unless I particularly wanted to order some false and futile heroics to try and salvage all our reputations, I would take the historic decision and tell the invasion force to turn around and suspend the operation for now, because the United States Navy has, in this scenario, achieved a bit of a mini Midway, and the loss of 2 out of 3 carriers committed, even if one of them was a light carrier, it's still a very painful blow and so much harder for the Japanese to recover from. I think experienced players would probably call it at this point and just say, yeah, this isn't worth the Empire of the Rising Sun pressing ahead with. And it's probably going to cause even more problems as 1942 rolls on. But anyway, yes, I know I drifted there, but for me, the strategic outcomes and the possibilities are the really wonderful things about games like this. And I've really enjoyed doing this demo. I hope you guys have enjoyed following this, and I hope it's also made sense. If there's anything you feel I've not covered and you would like me to do say. In fact, I have just thought of one, and that's surface combat. I haven't dealt with surface combat because most of the time people won't want to do it. So an example of surface combat, let's say by some miracle, the Japanese were able to get their surface forces in contact with the US. Let's say 2 of the cruiser forces butted up against each other. So let me put together a hypothetical scenario. Okay, we'll bring TF7 over there and TF10 over there. So of course, what happens, that would probably occur during the naval movement phase. So of course, they're now in each other's zones of control. You never move your task force into an enemy task force's hex. You always fight a battle. And battles are always a single round of combat. And the way they work is you take your ships. Let me just grab some likely opponents. For brevity's sake, let's say there's been a bit of task force reshuffling. And by some quirk, the Aoba and the Furutaka have bumped into the New Orleans and the Astoria. So the figures that are important for surface combat are your durability, again, and your surface combat rating. So the two US cruisers have a slight edge over their Japanese counterparts, but not that much of one. The first thing that happens is that the player with the larger ships declares what range he wants to fight the combat at. So in a daylight action, if the Japanese had a battleship and a heavy cruiser, they would, if they wanted to be cautious, they would say, I want this to be a very long range engagement at battleship gun range. Now, what this means is that only the Japanese battleship would be able to fire. If the Japanese wanted his heavy cruiser to be involved as well, he would generously say, let's fight this battle at heavy cruiser gun range. And that would give the US player a chance to fire back, in addition to giving the Japanese player a chance to use his heavy cruiser. Now, in a night battle, these niceties are suspended. So in a night battle, it's assumed that you've blundered into each other at what in naval terms is knife fighting range, and every class of ship can participate. So in a sense, with this example I've put together here, daylight and nighttime doesn't matter too much because they're the same category of ship anyway. So the naval combat chart works very much like all the other, I'll have to back out for this. There's the naval combat chart. It works very much like all the other charts in this game. You've got the strength points and you've got a dice roll result, and you just cross-reference as you make your roll. There is an early war naval rule that says the IJN gets a +1 to their dice roll when attacking ships rather than bombarding bases, which is fair enough. They were at the slightly more proficient side at this stage in the war, particularly in night actions. Also, Japanese destroyers are lethal in surface actions. If you allow a Japanese destroyer to get within fighting range, they double their attack values at night because of the long lance torpedo. So don't let those Japanese destroyers get close to you. So yes, one round of combat, and what happens is you pair your ships off. If you have an odd number of ships, the extra ship can focus on another one. Or you can, if you wish, combine fire on an enemy target. It's entirely up to you, but you have to declare your targets before any dice are rolled. Now, let's say that for the purposes of this example, the Japanese decide they're going to engage the corresponding ships, but the US decide they're going to concentrate their fire on the Aoba. So I'll back off again. I'll resolve the Japanese fire first, but these things are always, the damage is always applied simultaneously. So Aoba's going to shoot at New Orleans, and she gets a 4, +1 because she's Japanese. And with her surface combat rating of 5, that yields a result of 4 damage. So damage is applied in exactly the same way as in air-to-surface combat. You compare the damage result against New Orleans' durability rating. So 4 is below 5, so she's not inflicted enough damage to reach that threshold. So the assumption in game terms is New Orleans has taken hits, but they're not serious enough to impair her combat ability. Furutaka, meanwhile, is targeting the Astoria. Exactly the same numbers and modifiers. And she gets a 6 for a total of 7. So that is 8 damage. So when we come back to it, Astoria would have got it. So 8 damage goes all the way up to 5. Another hit for minor damage, and then 6 to flip it to significant. and then 7-8. So at the end of the battle, Astoria would have been significantly damaged with slightly reduced ratings, but otherwise still in the fight. But for the purposes of working out the damage, we'll keep her on her undamaged side. So you've got 6 and 6 for 12, and they're going to pile all of this pain on the Auerbach. They roll a 1, so it's just as well they decided to concentrate fire. That is 4 damage. It is exactly Auerbach's durability rating, but they would have needed to exceed it by 1 hit to inflict a minor damage token on the ship. So Auerbach got extremely lucky there. The US did the right thing. They concentrated fire on the target, but it just did not happen for them that day. So that would be the end of the battle. As I say, it's 1 round of combat, just like air combat, and then you put the ships back on their task force displays. So there's been a brief brush between the opposing forces. 1 US cruiser has been badly hit and damaged, and the Japanese have pretty much got away with it. But that is how surface combat works. So, sorry, that was a bit of a brief interruption as I suddenly remember I'd not actually covered a key element of this game. But yes, as I was saying before that very, very brief surface battle, if you have any questions, if there's anything you feel I've missed and not covered very well in this, please do say in the comments and I will come back to it, maybe even do another short demo video just to highlight that particular element. And yes, but in any case, guys, thank you so much for the comments and the interaction. It really is the best part of doing all of this, and it's great to have the dialogue with you all. I see I've already had some comments on the previous 2 videos already, so I will be swinging by soon to answer those. And yeah, I hope this has been useful. And as always with this series, with any of my game series, I will have a final chat, a final thoughts about it, just to go over what I really liked, because it's probably obvious I do like this game. There are a couple of things I think I want to highlight that make it slightly unusual and that they might have, that the designer missed out on. There's certain elements of carrier warfare that other games touch on that this one doesn't, and I'd like the chance to discuss why that might be. But that can wait for the next one. You guys have been more than patient, and the this combined 1-turn demonstration has run into an hour and a half. So thank you all so much for watching. As always, it's a real pleasure having your company on this show, this series, and it's always good to have your company. Thank you so much for sticking with me, especially my long-suffering veterans and some of you guys who've been with me right from the beginning. I really do appreciate this, and thank you so much for taking the trouble to watch the videos, and also for taking the trouble to write in. That always is awesome. If you're new to my channel, a very warm welcome to you. If this is the first of my videos you're watching, you're probably slightly confused. I would just say, if it is this excellent game, Task Force, that led you to find my channel, then do check out the 2 previous videos I've made about the game, and there will be another one forthcoming soon. If it's wargaming in general, you're more than welcome. Have a meander around the channel. I hope you find other things that you like. But as always, guys, whoever you are and wherever you're watching from, thank you so much again, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one. Take care. Bye.